And we've been reading 1984 by George Orwell, and so it's a challenging text. It's one of my favorite books because there's some really great parts at the end that are kind of exciting and interesting, and there's a lot of really interesting themes that it addresses. But there's this big section in the middle that's like 50 or 60 pages of this nonfiction book that was written by a character, and one of the other characters is reading it. So as the reader of the novel, you have to kind of read this really long section. And I knew that it would be really hard for them to understand because it's a lot of historical philosophy and sort of political discussion, and it's not really anything that they'd probably encountered before. I wanted them to understand the purpose of these ideas in the story and how they kind of connect to the development of the plot and the way the characters kind of experience things and how their world is created. But I wanted to not throw them into it cold, so I thought it would be good to do a close reading with that. Today we're going to start Chapter 3, War is Peace. So I have 5 paragraphs that I took that kind of highlight the most important ideas dealing with war and what Oceania does during war and what it really means in George Orwell's society. I printed off copies of a few pages to give them to kind of be able to write on and things like that. And I had them just read it through first. I kind of explained this is a section. Winston is reading this nonfiction book as he's kind of moving through some of his character development, trying to decide how he wants to respond to this society. So we're going to read it and get an understanding of the things that he understands. First step was they read it through once. We read the first couple paragraphs out loud so they weren't thrown totally into it cold. They don't always like that. And then I had them just make a star beside any area where they had questions or needed some clarification. So they weren't actually writing questions. They were just thinking that they might have something to say about this section here or there. Then we went back to the text, they read it again, and they had to this time go back to the places they'd starred and actually write their questions in the margins, but they needed to reread because they didn't necessarily remember what every single star meant as they went back through. I want you to go back to those places where you made your marks or your notes and come up with 4 to 5 good questions and comments based on the reading. You don't want to ask things like, what do you think? Do you think that this war in Oceania is fair? Not things like that. You want them to be text-based questions. So trying to understand the ideas in the text. They can be as simple as, what is a floating fortress? That's one we've gotten a lot of so far. Or they can be a little bit deeper, like, why do you think the leaders arranged these alliances? And then I went to the board and we generated a list of about, I think we had 6 to 8 questions that they shared based on what they read. We talked about some of the questions. We discussed the types of questions they'd asked. Like some of them asked, what does this word mean? Which, there's not as much critical thinking behind that. But a lot of the questions were more abstract and were more thematic. And they were saying, what does this have to do with the part we just read, or things like that. The final step in the process, I let them work with a partner, and they had to go back through the text together and answer 2 of the questions from our class list, and then a 3rd question that they had written themselves on their sheet. So they got to interact with somebody a little, but they were still going back through the text, still had to read and find evidence to support the answers to their questions. And then we shared a little bit, and I collected what they had written. Kids can be like, why are we going to read this 3 times? They feel like you should only ever read something once. And so I tried to explain to them, especially since they're seniors going into college, this is important. And when you read something in college, you can't just look at it once and say, perfect, I've got it all. You have to go back and make notes and comments. And it's a great way to come to discussion in college and have some annotations prepared to be successful. So the close reading is a great reason to kind of practice some of those skills.